more on how the Trump administration does not want anyone to look into what is happening and how they are handling the virus. I want to bring in Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. Senator, one of the reasons I want to talk to you tonight, in cable news coverage, we see a lot of tragedy, partly because of the way the news works. Mass shootings, terrorist attacks, plane crashes, things like that. And the politics around those tragedies can get very ugly. You can sometimes feel like people are cynically manipulating those deaths in favor of a preferred political agenda. But I'm just struck at this moment. I mean, the grief here is immense. Newtown and what happened in Connecticut is a sort of defining event, I think, in your political life. Like, how are you processing this? And what does it say to you to watch this just sheer lack of empathy at all from the White House?
Yeah, I mean, of all of the horrificness out of the White House during the last 3 months, the president's total inability to be empathetic and to plug into the grief and the terror of this disease is maybe the most alarming. I mean, listen, what we know for those of us that work in and around gun violence is that when you lose someone unexpectedly to a violent act, there are normally 20 other individuals, family members, friends, brothers, sisters, who experience a diagnosable trauma because of that loss. And I don't know that it's going to be very different when it comes to the 30,000, 40,000 people who are taken quickly because of this virus. There are going to be ripples of grief and trauma that we are going to be dealing with for decades. And that just speaks to the enormity of the healthcare project that's in front of us. It's not just about trying to control and eradicate the virus. It's also about dealing with the trauma and the mental health effects that are going to spill forth for months and years after we have moved on from this national emergency.
I thought there was such a tell in that the president's tweet today, which we don't often read on air, about, everyone's going to have to forget this because they're both not wanting people to look into the ways in which they were warned and ignored those warnings, but also what they're doing right now. I mean, it is really striking to me the president went out of his way to remove the person who was appointed to be the inspector general over the trillions of dollars, right, in that rescue package, specifically $500 billion, remove this guy with a sterling reputation, Glenn Fine, who's tussled with Republicans and Democrats alike. What does that signal to you about what they plan to do?
Well, let me say one quick thing first, which is that we don't have the luxury of time here, right? We can't spend a year figuring out what went wrong because the next virus isn't going to wait for us. And so part of the reason many of us want to immediately start standing up an international anti-pandemic infrastructure is because we don't know when the next virus is going to arrive. But what you're referring to is the here and now of how the president is, for instance, allocating the $2 trillion that we have given him. My worry is the president is right now thinking first, second, and third about his reelection. And he is trying to arrange the politics surrounding him in a way that he can use the infrastructure of the federal government to get himself reelected. He's got $2 trillion that he's sitting on now. Wouldn't he love it if he could be able to spend it to reward friends and punish enemies? He now has an intelligence infrastructure without a meaningful, competent inspector general. He's free to perhaps try to maneuver intelligence and the spin on intelligence in order to favor his reelection. So I just think this assault on inspectors general is not coincidental to the general election effectively beginning.
The point you made there at the beginning, and which ties to the inspector general to me, which is so important here, is that I think people can view this sort of idea of accountability and oversight as sort of some kind of political score settling. But there's a pressing substantive need right now, right? Because the virus isn't going to go away until we have a vaccine. I mean, we know in 1918 there was a spring bump and then it really hit in the fall, right? We don't know if that's going to happen here again, but we're in it right now. The mistakes that have been made or are being made or going back to work too early, all of those things can cost more lives in the moment.
Well, and if you don't set up the public health infrastructure necessary to test everyone who's symptomatic, trace their contacts, and then quarantine, then you, A, can't get your hands wrapped around this particular emergency, but then you don't have that infrastructure set up for the next round of coronavirus or the next pathogen that hits. So one of the clear stories to tell about what went wrong is that we lost tens of thousands of public health workers since the Great Recession of 2007, 2009. And right now, there seems to be no plan from this administration to rebuild them. And we don't have time because this isn't going away and the next virus might be just around the corner.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, as always, it's great to talk to you. Thank you for your time.